Hey folks, welcome back. Today marks the first in a new mini-series I'm putting together, which is all around hardware advice for your home lab. So whether you're looking to start in home labbing or look for opportunities to expand and upgrade, I'm going to try and put together quarterly videos to help keep tabs of what's developing in the marketplace, both new and in the second-hand space. And don't worry, there won't be another Zima board posting here. We don't need any more of those. So in preparing for this video, I put together some areas which I think would be most useful for you. But this will likely evolve as these videos continue, and I really do want this to be interactive, so please post some of your recommendations and things that you would like to see. But off the bat, I'm going to cover things like a consumer build. There will be both a premium and a budget build. I'll also look at servers, and I'm going to stick to second-hand servers here, just because we don't want to be spending tens of thousands of dollars on new machines. I'll also cover all-in-ones, so things like Nooks and ThinkPads, etc. that you can pick up quite easily on eBay for very reasonable prices. I'll cover switches from both entry-level to medium and prosumer. We'll look at NICs that you can use to upgrade your networking within your existing home lab. I'll have a quick review of access points that if you're going to be replacing your home router with your own firewall, you're probably going to need to buy an access point. And then I'll provide a quick overview of some of the accessories that we might want. So things like a rack, things like cooling solutions within your rack, UPSs, and patch panels. And I will provide links to all of this hardware in the description. Now, these are Amazon affiliate links, so if you do choose to buy it from Amazon, if that is the best price for you, please consider using that link because it's a free and easy way for you to give me a small tip without it costing you a penny. So let's jump into the consumer builds first, and I'll provide both an AMD and an Intel offering. For the CPUs, I recommend the Intel i7-13700 non-K variant. That's because we don't lose a great deal of performance and we gain much better TDP, so almost half the power of the K variant. If you wanted to splash out on the K variant, you can, and that will give you price equivalency to the AMD that I recommend, which is the Ryzen 9 7900 non-X variant, again for similar reasons. Both of the chips on screen are rated at a 65 watt TDP, and you can start to see the benefit of smaller node sizes, where AMD is the current champion. Now, the Intel has 16 cores and 24 threads, and that's because it's using the performance and efficiency cores, which historically has had some quirks with Linux, but is in a much better place now. And the Ryzen just has the straightforward number of cores doubled because it's hyper-threaded. Here we're looking at 12 cores and 24 threads. Now of the two, if you're looking for a pure Proxmox virtualization environment, I'd probably go down the route of the Ryzen. It has better thermals, better efficiency, and you don't have to worry about performance and efficiency cores. However, if you're looking to utilize the iGPU, typically Intel has better support and their iGPUs are more performant. So if you're looking for an all-in-one box, maybe the Intel is the one for you. And as you've seen in previous videos, we can pass through the iGPU to virtual machines or just use it bare metal as we want. One thing to note when using a consumer device is that the number of PCI lanes is significantly reduced from server infrastructure. You're looking at 20 lanes here through the CPU and another 4 through the chipset, so a total of 24 usable lanes. This is opposed to the server infrastructure where you're going to be into the 80 plus quite easily. So do have a think whether you need a consumer device or whether you'd be better suited with a server. One thing to note on here is that actually the 13700 is rated to push all the way up over 200 watts, which is huge for a server that you're going to have on all the time. So do make sure that you are aware of that and that you've got a cooling solution that's going to be able to tame this beast. The good news is both of these platforms support DDR5 and also PCIe Gen 4 and Gen 5. However, that's pretty much overkill for a home lab in most scenarios, but if that is something that you're wanting and you are on the bleeding edge, maybe you've got high performance graphics cards that you want to pass through to virtual machines, etc., then these are pretty good platforms. In terms of comparison, now there is a discrepancy here in the cost. The Ryzen chip is about $60 more than the Intel chip, but I think the positives outweigh the cost, and it also gives you a bit of an idea of what you can do in this space. You could downgrade to the next tier down on the Ryzen chip, but I really think this is standout value. The thermals and the efficiency are amazing for home labbing. And you can also see that there's a significant uplift in performance of over 20% between the two, which I think is well justified with the price. Now, if you're new to home labbing and you're looking to get into this space, you might be quite surprised that there are Workstation boards that take consumer chips. And these are typically thanks to ASRock Rack, who have been the pioneers in this space for a while now. So the two motherboards I've got on screen are the variants that I recommend, but there are sub-variants of these, typically which introduce things like 10 gig networking. Now, both of these boards are considerably more expensive than their consumer counterparts, so do bear that in mind. However, they do give you IPMI, which is that out-of-band support. So things like you don't need to now have a KVM switch because you can remotely administrate this machine over IP. I'm talking about things like being able to get into the BIOS, turn this thing on and off remotely, which is a godsend. You need to work out whether that is the right platform for you and whether you need those features, because it does come with a heavy premium. These are typically over $600 and difficult to find. And you could probably get a consumer counterpart for in the $200 space, but it won't have those server grade bells and whistles. So to counter these Workstation boards, let's have a look at what consumer options we've got, which will still give us a compelling home lab offering. The two consumer boards that I recommend in this space for Intel and AMD are the MAG Z790 Tomahawk Wi-Fi for Intel and the ASRock X670E Steel Legend for AMD. Now, the Intel one here is cheaper, it's around £200, and the ASRock comes in sort of nearer to £300, so there is a discrepancy here. It's known that AM5 is more expensive than Intel's at the moment, but getting back to the features, these are really solid motherboards in terms of bang for your buck. The Intel one is going to give you 3 × 16 slots, whereas the AMD is going to give you 2. But as I mentioned before, the number of PCIe lanes is probably going to influence what you can do here anyway. Both of these boards have really good reviews in terms of longevity and build quality, which is something that's really important for home labbing because these devices are going to be on 24/7 most likely. Both motherboards have 4 M.2 slots, which is pretty insane if you take your mind back just a few years as to where we were. And this could be useful because it might mean that you don't need to go and buy a quad NVMe adapter for your server. The Intel board here is going to give you 7 SATA connections, and the AMD only gives 4. So do bear that in mind if you're going to be using this for, say, a NAS, but also note that you could plug in a HBA to expand your SATA storage. Now, for a more premium focused home lab using consumer parts, I recommend a minimum of 64 gigabytes, but tweak that to your requirements. In terms of vendor, you'll notice they're both the same. I've been running Corsair Vengeance memory for years now. I actually run the DDR4, but I've checked out all of the reviews, compatibility and things across the home lab space, and the same trend continues into DDR5. You'll just get the benefits of DDR5 supporting ECC memory correction, just on the memory side, not on the bit between the memory and the chipset. So do bear that in mind, and if you wanted that feature, you do need to make sure that the motherboard's compatible. In terms of speed and latency, I've not gone too crazy here because this is just a home lab. Typically memory isn't going to be the bottleneck anyway, and it's not that critical. If you're wanting to spin up, say, a gaming VM, then you might want to optimize your RAM and max that out. But do bear in mind, as you start to get those frequencies nice and high and the latencies low, you're going to pay a premium. Now on the budget consumer build, I recommend the Intel i5 12400 and the AMD Ryzen 5 5600. Again, these are both non-K, non-X variants, and that comes with benefits in the TDP rating for those chips. Now, we're fortunate that we're in an era where you can have 6 cores and 12 threads on a consumer device that's going to cost just over £100, and these are really compelling options for probably a moderately decently powered home lab. So yes, you can go with the more expensive build that I showed earlier, but actually this is probably going to be the sweet spot for most people looking to get into the home lab space. If you do need more grunt, it's likely you don't need more compute power, it's probably just expandability, RAM, etc. Your mileage may vary. In terms of motherboards for those respective CPUs, MSI has had a field day. I recommend for Intel the MAG B660M mortar. and for AMD, the MAG B550 Tomahawk. Both of these are from the mid-range, and that makes sense given the CPU we're going to put in this, but actually doesn't really skimp on many of the features that we care about. Arguably, most of the features are going to be around maybe a couple of extra PCIe lanes with a later chipset, and probably an improved VRM layout, because with these chips that we're using, you can't overclock, or you wouldn't be able to overclock as far, and thus you don't need a fancy, aka expensive, VRM solution. As for the memory, again, I'm going with the Corsair Vengeance. It seems to be the best bang for your buck for Homelab builds on a budget. In terms of a PSU, I really recommend the Corsair HXI series. I've used them for years. I've bought at least 4, 5 I think, for my home servers. I still have some that are 6 years old. They're still super silent, super cool, and just work. And these have been on 24/7. For a more prosumer build, something like 1000 watts is probably what you're going to be looking at. These are titanium models, so really high power efficiency. And I'm making the assumption that you're probably going to pass through something like a GPU, so you might need this horsepower. If you're not going to go down the GPU route, then you can stick to the same series and get something much smaller, maybe a 500 or a 750 watt in this same category. On to the all-in-one options, starting at the budget end. Something like the Lenovo ThinkCenters are really highly regarded. They're simple X-Thin clients from businesses. Typically you can pick them up refurbished either through Amazon or eBay, and they're going to give you low-end compute power in a small, efficient package. Choose the model that suits you. There's too many to cover in one video, but I've gone more from brand reliability and performance perspective. So just spend more if you want to bump up your specs, in line with some of the recommended hardware that I'm going to touch on later, predominantly around things like RAM and NVMe drives, hard drives, etc. On the prosumer side, I don't think you can go far wrong with the Intel NUC. These things have been getting high reviews for years, and it's well earned. You're going to get good performance, good efficiency in a well-built package. Now, the current iteration is the 13th gen NUC, and I believe Intel's just wound up production, and it's going to be with third parties like Asus going forward. But anyway, these are a great deal, and I recommend you choose one that suits your requirements. As you go down the stack, say the Intel NUC 12, the 11, the 10, etc., they follow the Intel chip revisions. You're going to get better value for money, but obviously they're going to be less performant. So have a look at the specs, choose the one that's right for you. At the prosumer end, I think you can't go wrong with the 13th gen NUC. So moving over into the server space, probably primarily due to things like PCIe lanes and the fact that you're going to get greater number of cores that you can distribute across your VMs for a much lower price. Now, I'm going to assume that you can accommodate a server. Obviously, you'll need a rack, etc., and somewhere quiet that you can put this if you're not planning on modifying it. But the servers I recommend are the Dell R730s. They're in a great spot at the moment in terms of price performance. You can pick them up, and I do recommend you get them with a V4 Xeon processor. Those are the ones that I have, because those are going to support DDR4 RAM, which obviously brings with it the benefits of increased speed and performance. I've been running my R730 now for about a year. I've modified the fan slightly to make it a bit more hospitable, but it's just over there, and hopefully you can't hear it. But it's been rock solid, comes with loads of enterprise features, and is really simple to install Proxmox and get pass-through up and running in a breeze. Now, to buy this, you're obviously going to have to go to a third-party retailer, so somewhere like Bargain Hardware in the UK is a great option, but equally, I just bought mine from eBay, and there's tons of people selling these on there. You've just got to try and find a reputable reseller. You can configure these things heavily, but you usually get what's off the bat because these are second-hand. So I typically tend to go for a bare bones build. What I mean by that is you just get the CPU, the PSU, and some RAM, and you'll provide your own drives. I say that because second-hand drives is a bit of a Russian roulette. You don't really know what you're going to get. So maybe that's okay for you. You want to take that risk, but I'll be moving on to hard drives later on. The good thing with the R730 is it comes with 16 SSD caddies on the front, or if you go with the XD model, you can actually fit, I think it's 12 HDD drives. One thing I really want to draw your attention to as well in the server space is much like we had the Workstation boards for consumer devices, we can do Workstation boards in the server space. And the one I've got on the screen here uses a 2nd gen EPYC CPU, and I think this is a really good deal. Now, politics aside, this coming from China and risk of transit, etc., there are many success stories from people buying these, and the beauty is here you're going to get a ton of CPU performance, 33,000 pass score, you're going to get plenty of cores, and you can choose the RAM to suit your requirements. On top of that, this will fit in a desktop PC. You can use a standard cooler that you would use in a desktop, albeit make sure it's compatible with EPYC CPUs, and you could use a modular PSU. So the one I've previously mentioned for our consumer build, that would work here. It's a standard 24 pin. So these are a really great option if you want server grade performance in a consumer-esque package. So moving on to switches. The entry-level switch, and these are the switches that I've started off with and I've featured in some of my earlier videos, I don't think you can go wrong with the Netgear ProSafes. They've been rock solid for me. They give you 1 gig, they give you a management interface, and they support some of the basic features like VLANs, which will be great for starting to segment and play with your network. Moving up a notch into sort of the medium territory, I recommend the Microtic switches. Now, this one on here is going to give you a similar number of ports, but it's also going to give you 2 10 gig ports, which you could use as a trunk within your network. Now, I must stress the actual Microtic tech stack is really compelling, and they have alternatives for all of the models I'm going to show today, and they typically come at a much greatly reduced price. So do consider pretty much all of their models. They are really good. They just don't quite necessarily have the eye candy of something like a Unify, which we'll move on to now. Now, if you're already integrated into the Unify product stack and you're looking for an enterprise grade model, I recommend this switch just because I've used it. Now, it is overkill, it's really expensive for what you're going to get, but it has been solid for me. So from that perspective, I can recommend it. However, I do want to highlight a much cheaper alternative that is arguably more performant as well. So to do that, we're going to go back to our good old friends at Microtic. Now, for pretty much the exact same features, you're going to be paying less than half the price. Now, if the Unify interface is worth $700 to you, fair enough, I get it, you want the single pane of glass. But if you're looking for some prosumer features on a shoestring, I mean, this is still going to cost you 500 quid plus, this is a really good option. It's rock solid, really well reviewed, and has all of the features that you want to take your Homelab to the next level. Moving on to NICs, network interface cards for the uninitiated. At the low end, I recommend the Intel i210. This is probably the same chipset that comes bundled with some of your motherboards, and I've used it for years. It's getting more difficult to recommend now because it's long in the tooth, and 2.5 gigabit Ethernet is rapidly becoming the de facto standard. So do look for 2.5 gigabyte variants, but you can pretty much pick up an i210 for dirt cheap these days, and it has out-of-the-box support with pretty much every operating system. If you're looking for something similar in the 1 gig space but you want more density, then the i350 T4 is probably the way to go. Again, I've used one of these for years. It's great. The 350 has a few more enterprise chipset features, but it's not a massive improvement in terms of performance than the i210. It just gives you 4 ports in one PCI slot instead of 1. So you're going to get more return on investment for sacrificing a PCIe slot. If you're looking to get into the 10 gig space, I don't think you can go far wrong with the Mellanox Connect X3s. Now, these will give you 10 gig, and there are dual port variants as you can see on screen. I've been running these for years, and you'll have seen them in my videos. They've been absolutely rock solid, and it's a fantastic way to give all of your VMs 10 gig networking. I share these as a trunk on my hypervisor, and I use one of the ports on my switch to make sure that I had rapid connections between my firewalls and my NAS, etc. Do bear in mind, and I'll probably cover this in subsequent videos, the world is moving on from 10 gig, and you can pick up 25 gigs and even 40 gig cards now for a similar price, so do bear that in mind. For HBAs, host bus adapters, I recommend, and I'm on the Serve the Home website here, thanks guys, the LSIs are rock solid, and I've been using those for a number of years before this article was written, But if you go on things like the TrueNAS forums, etc., these have been recommended for a long time, and for good reason. I've never had an issue with mine in a virtualized Proxmox environment, passing through drives, and even bare metal. So I recommend you get the LSIs. There are different variants. Do make sure that you check the ending. Some of them are designed for external connectors, i.e. they expect you to have a cable coming out the back of your machine and into another, something like a JBOD, or there are internal ones as well. Doesn't necessarily matter if you get a killer deal on an external only. There are external to internal connectors that you can buy to transform them. Just bear in mind that those give an additional cost, so you might not be reaping the same benefit you were before. Now, with HBAs in mind, let's talk about hard drives. So I'm going to focus on your standard 3.5-inch hard drive here. And the one I recommend up front is the Toshiba MG series. Now, you pick the size that you need. I went with the 16 terabytes because I think that's a good balance between size, density, and price. If you start to get too big, resilvering takes forever and don't actually think it's the best way to go. I opted for 6 of these 16 drives about a year ago. One of them did fail, but the return process was straightforward. But other than that, they've been rock solid, they perform well, and on the spec space, they're better than some of the competitors with a greater cache. Also in this space, and ignore the crazy price, I'm not sure what's going on at the moment, I run some Iron Wolf hard drives. I actually have 8 terabyte ones in a RAIDs 2 configuration. And again, I've been running these for 5 years. They're probably coming to the end of their life now, but I'm going to keep running them until I start getting problems. These have been rock solid. I've never had to replace one of the drives, and I definitely recommend them. Now, for those of you who want to add NVMe drives to your consumer servers or even your enterprise servers, I've got 4 in my Dell R730, and they're attached to a quad PCIe adapter. I use the Asus one. I recommend you get the FireCuda 530. Now, as you can see on screen, you can get the 1 terabyte for just over £70, which I think is a steal. These are Gen 4, so I don't actually get full advantage of Gen 4 in mine because it's a Gen 3 PCI. But as long as you've got PCIe Gen 4, you're going to be getting over 7 gigs per second on these things. And they have a TBW, that's the total write capacity, of 1,250 terabytes, which should be more than enough for your Homelab setup. If that's a little bit too exotic for your budget, I recommend the Samsung 970 EVO. Now, this is Gen 3, so you're not going to get those crazy speeds. And it's DRAM-less, but it does use some of your system memory to overcome that bottleneck. So whilst it isn't as performant and it won't last as long in long writes, typically for general Homelab use, it should be fine. But if you are doing something that is read-write intensive over long periods, do consider the FireCuda 530. In terms of access points, so you typically are going to need this when you set up your own firewall and you replace your ISP router, which would have built-in Wi-Fi. I've been using UniFi APs for years now, and they've been rock solid. I definitely recommend their latest model, the U6. I've got 2 of those, both the AC Pro and the LR model. Both have been absolutely fine, stable. They're set to auto-update, and I've not had any issues with them. It obviously plugs in nicely with the UniFi controller, and I get good visibility of all the clients connected to my network, and there's some reasonably advanced features as well that you can do with them. Now, in terms of a rack, I can't go into too much detail on that because there's so many variables. The size that you need, the size that you can accommodate, but I'm going to come at this at an angle from a brand I recommend. And I use a Trip Lite, the one that you can see on here. This will probably be overkill for a lot of people, and you obviously need a dedicated space to store it. But it is just a piece of metal, but the build quality is really good for Trip Lite. There's a ton of accessories for it, good resale value, and it's just been generally quite easy to work with. There's obviously a ton of different ones that you can pick up for dirt cheap. Really do go and check out the second-hand market. There's a lot of businesses that go under where you can find great deals on ex-server stuff, including racks. In terms of patch panels, I've been using the TrendNet on screen for a while now. It's rock solid, good build quality. I've not had any issues with any dodgy connections. And as you can see, the 2,300 plus ratings speak for themselves. I highly recommend this one. Obviously there are options available, so you can choose the right size for you, whether you want a half U, a full U, or you don't want 24 ports. In terms of attesting its functionality, I run both 10 gig through this, and it works fine with Cat6a, and I also run my Unify PoE cameras through this and my access points, and I've not had any issues with dropouts. In terms of a UPS, now I use the APC Smart UPS. These aren't the rack ones. There are rack versions of these, so you can choose those if you want. And I do understand that these aren't the cheapest. You can pick up things like the CyberPowers, I'll show you one in a moment, which are considerably cheaper. But there's a reason why these APCs are so highly regarded and you see them out in the enterprise. They're just rock solid. I've had mine now for a number of years. It saved my bacon more than a few times. And I just highly recommend it. There's some advanced accessories that you can bundle with these as well. Now, you could argue they should come with them. And these aren't unique to APC. You can get them with other competitors. Things like an add-in network card, which allows you to do gentle shutdown when you have a power cut. So in the event of your UPS running out of battery, it's not just going to dump your machine off. It will gracefully shut down. As you can see, the CyberPowers are considerably cheaper, and there are good reviews and good recommendations from people in the Homelab community, but your mileage might vary. Typically, you get what you pay for. If you're looking for some rack cooling, typically not something we have to worry about here in the UK, certainly if you've not got a crazy setup. But if you're in a warmer climate, then rack cooling is definitely something you need to consider. And these AC Infinities are very highly regarded. I've used them in the past and I've seen them in enterprise, so I recommend you go and get these. And this leads nicely on to the next segment, which is cooling in general. And obviously I recommend Noctua fans. Now, as I alluded to earlier, I've actually modified some of my servers and the cases that I use to include Noctua fans. I've got rid of the proprietary fans or the ones that are bundled with the cases and replaced them with Noctuas. Not only are they more performant, but they're also quiet. And that has obvious advantages and enables me to sit next to my rack, which is just over there. Whilst it seems like an egregious expense on just some fans, I've had some Noctuas now that are running for more than 10 years consistently, and they don't show any signs of stopping soon. Okay, so that concludes the whistle-stop tour of my hardware recommendations. Now, I enjoyed putting that together and I hope you enjoyed watching it. This is by no means a comprehensive deep dive. These are just what I recommend for you to get started, or at least point you in the right directions. As I mentioned, I've got all of these linked in the description below. They are affiliate links, so if it is the best price that you can find, please do consider using it. It's an easy way to give me a free tip that won't cost you a penny either. I do want to create a community around this, so I'm thinking of the best way to do that. I'll likely set up a website and keep a forum post or something like that, where we can keep tabs on all of the best deals that are out there. One notable mention if you're going to be buying secondhand servers is LabGopher, and I've touched on this before. It's a good way to do a quick search for what it thinks is a good deal. So it will look at CPU, RAM, hard drives and cost, and then it will show you what it thinks is good value for money. Now, do apply your own logic to that and don't just trust it, and also double check and verify the descriptions on eBay. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.